to be dummy approximately 25% of the time. So, in addition to bidding, defense is a very, very critical skill to have control of, because if you're giving up tricks on defense on every single board, you're just shooting yourself in the foot, especially at a game like Match Points, which is, completely based around, getting the maximum score for your side. So if you're sloughing tricks on defense with that, you're really doing damage to your game. So talking about defense and how to visualize how to better defend and communicate with your partner, because a lot of defense is about partnership communication. There's a bunch of different ways you communicate with each other during the defense in order to transfer information, in order to hopefully map the way to get your best result there. So it really all needs to be explored there. So that's what I'm going to kind of dive into. And this won't be this won't be a very long series compared to bidding, because, you could talk about defense for a very long time, but there's only a really few fundamental things that are worth probably mentioning. And then the rest is just a bunch of examples that you can find in books and whatnot. So for that, I would leave it to better written books out there. And for book recommendations, I think that Frank Stewart's book on defense is very good, and I think William Root, who's a very famous old school bridge author, is very good at it too. They have pretty good books out there on defense if you guys are looking for any resources. But let's dive into what we were going to talk about. So basically, my thinking with this is actually to continue off of the convention card I have as a part of the bidding series, and then just explore what we haven't talked about, which is leads, carding, and signaling, and then some basic other defensive concepts is really all that I want to tackle. And of course, if you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know. And for those who aren't catching this live, you will be able to see this on YouTube through my YouTube channel, which you can find with the YouTube command. And I'll put the notes and everything in Discord, in the defense channel on my Discord server, which you can find using the Discord command. But let's dive into it. So, like I was saying, in the long run, you defend more than anything else. It's a very critical aspect of the game, which gets overlooked because people really want to focus on bidding and declare play. Playing the hand is fun and all, but you're going to defend more often than not. Part of the reason I actually bid a little more conservatively is because I feel like my defense usually is in a very good spot. So if I feel like I can defend, sometimes I'm going to take the lower road in order to not put myself on offense all the time. So today I really wanted to focus on leads, and then probably the second part of this series, which is really the only other part I had planned, is going to take place on Monday, and we'll focus on signals. So let's just talk about opening leads, and if I breeze through this, I might even do both. But we'll time it out and see where it goes from there. So opening lead, principles are pretty basic there. The idea is that underleading an ace against a suit contract is very, very dangerous, unless, you have a very good hunch to be able to do so. Leading empty aces is also rarely right. You want to use your aces to capture high cards instead of just make them go on air. Of course, there's other situations which override this, but that's a general guiding principle. Like, for example, against a slam, you might lead an ace that doesn't have anything behind it, because if you don't lead it, you may never get it. If there's a long-running suit where they can discard it, then you need to be able to lead that ace to get it. And besides, on top of that, maybe they had a bad auction, and they're actually in slam off an ace-king in a suit. And if you don't lead the ace, you might only take one trick if they can get one discard. There's been situations where that's happened. It's not pretty for sure. You feel dumb for not leading an ace. But I would also not say at the same time that you should always lead an ace against a slam. It's more of a judgment call, and you got to really pay attention to the auction to be able to determine what's right in those situations. Now, if your partner had bid or signaled for the suit at some point in the auction, like if they had made a lead directing double or they had overcalled it, then, leading an empty ace is a more standard lead. Like, for example, if your partner opens a spade and you're sitting with ace third and you support them, then you're probably going to lay down the ace. And for the discussion of underleading aces, there are conventions out there, for example, like Rosencrantz doubles, which we were talking about in the bidding series, where a Rosencrantz double shows either the ace or king in the suit that you overcalled and at least doubles in support. Now, in that situation, if you're looking at the ace and your partner's got the king, then you're encouraged to underlead the ace, because if they have king dub, then you lead to their king, and they lead back to your ace, and you give them a ruff potentially. So it is important to have all that in your arsenal. Of course, everybody knows that in terms of honor leads, leading the top of an honor sequence is generally highly recommended as a top choice of lead. But what else is there? Well, leading from your strongest suit is a pretty high one. Although I would say be careful about this, because if you're, especially if you're like leading into an equally strong hand, like if they open one no trump and you're looking at ace queen in a suit, and they're playing no trump, it's probably not a highly recommended lead in that situation. Because if they've got the balance of the points, you might be leading into a tennis, like a king jack, for example. Or if you have like king jack in a suit, you could be leading into ace queen. Of course, you got to take other judgment calls into what you're viewing there. Like for example, if they've opened a no trump and they're playing one no, and you're sitting with only X amount of points, your partner's got a decent hand over there because you're minimal, then leading from that sequence becomes a lot safer because they have to have some cards, and while they may not necessarily have it, then at least there's chances that they might. Now, for example, if you have the majority of the points in that situation, then it becomes a very bad lead, as we're going to talk about with aggressive versus passive leads. And then, likewise, for suit contracts, leading away from king empty can be a bit dangerous. I can't tell you how many times I've led away from king empty and I find queen on the board and ace in their hand, or vice versa, and it blows up a trick. So, you got to have some good judgment on that. If you feel like the auction screams for it, sure. But I've recently been seeing that I've been doing better in the long run by avoiding those leads and hoping that at some point I can just get a trick in that suit. Doesn't always work. Your partner might have the cover cards and you look foolish, but, it's a very touch and go thing. Leading the unbid suit is always usually a pretty good candidate. Like if they bid 3 suits in an auction, like a club, a heart, a spade, and then they wind up in some spade contract, leading diamonds usually works out all right. Except, of course, if you're looking at ace empty, then it becomes a little more dangerous. But if you're looking at just some suit headed by an honor, then that becomes a much safer lead. And then, there's a lot to be said for leading trump in a lot of auctions. Leading trump can actually do a lot of good for your side. Sometimes it doesn't give away anything and they still have to play the hand out. You might be cutting into a cross ruff that they need. I mean, it really depends on the auction. Like if one person's shown a huge amount of trump while the other person was just acquiescing into the contract, then it's not necessarily such a good lead because, you're leading into a trump stack that's not going to go very far. But if it's like an auction where they're in a 4-4 fit, then there's a lot to be said for leading trump because you're cutting in to their communication there that they might need for ruffs. Those ruffs might be their additional tricks that they need to make the contract. It might come up short if you do that. So leading trump looks pretty good in that scenario. Sometimes you finesse your partner. I mean, how many times have I seen myself lead from a doubleton trump and they're in an 8-card fit and I pick up the queen for them? It's not great, but generally it disrupts a plan where they have a cross ruff. Like if they bid a few suits before arriving at the suit, then it doesn't necessarily look so bad. I would say about leading trump, though, is that you should definitely not do it with a singleton. With a singleton, it generally blows up. Because your partner's got, based on the auction, of course, like if they've had a Jacoby auction and they're in a 5-4 fit, that might be a bit different. Although, then again, you might finesse your partner in that situation. But if they're like in an 8-card fit and you're looking at a stiff trump, then it's a very dangerous lead because your partner's got 4, you might be finessing your partner there, and that could be very bad. Like in that situation when you catch your partner with like jack fourth or something and you just throw this whole thing into a hex, it's not so great. I would not do it with a singleton. I would try to find another lead. And then I know this is kind of like some people's preference versus other people hate it, but the topic of leading doubletons, I'm not a big fan of leading doubletons, especially honored doubletons, unless the auction really calls for it, especially like if my partner overcalled the suit, for example. I don't like, leading queen dub or king dub unless I really feel like that's going to be the way, unless the auction really yells at me and says that should be the lead. I'm not a huge fan of those leads. Once again, it usually finesses your partner, and you're leading to some type of tennis, like you lead from queen dub and you find the king on the board and the jack in this guy's hand. I try to avoid those leads because they usually result in frozen suits. And I am not one who likes to what we call thaw gold frozen suits. I usually try to take our tricks in those. So that's about suits. No trump, of course, is very similar. Of course, against no trump, under leading aces is fine. And, of course, leading from your strongest suit is the best way to develop tricks. And like I said earlier, leading away from tennises can be dangerous for that reason. King, jack, ace, queen, based on the type of hand you and your partner are showing in the auction, that could be dangerous. There's been times I've avoided that lead and it turns out being the right lead, but I felt like more in the long run by avoiding that lead and finding another lead, hoping my partner could eventually lead through or that they lead up to it, works well. That kind of leads into the discussion of passive versus aggressive leads. You got to figure out when it's time to go passive versus when it's time to go aggressive. And the general guidelines for this are, if you're the one who has the majority of the points between you and your partner, you want to lead passively because you want the hand to come to you. You want to make a neutral lead that's probably not going to finesse your partner and then just have the hand play into you. Like if they're bidding up to game with like no interruptions from you and your partner and you're sitting on 11 points, it's pretty safe to say your partner's going to have a pretty poor hand over there. And so, you don't want to lead away from a king or something. You just want to find your most neutral suit and, just have the tricks come to you. At no trump also. And no trump, you're probably going to find your most neutral suit and just like maybe make a top of nothing lead and then just hope that the hand gets played into you that way. Usually by leading those suits, you end up doing more bad than good if you're leading from strength in those situations. Now, on the other hand, if your partner's the one with the points, you want to find their values, and therefore you need to lead aggressively. Like if they're bidding up to 3-0, like on a 1-0, 3-0 auction, especially like where the 3-0 bidder is a passed hand so that their hand is limited, and you're sitting on a 2 count, now your partner's got a good hand, and you need to hit their values. And in that case, usually leading from your shortest suit works pretty well. Like if you're sitting with a doubleton there, especially in a major, like in a 1-0, 3-0 auction, I would probably lead my doubleton there and hope to hit my partner with 4 or 5 of them, and then just have the values that they have to have across the board develop, and them eventually establishing that suit. So the general guideline there is when you have the majority, go passive. When your partner has the majority, go aggressive. Then we have to talk about count leads. Of course, I think everybody is familiar with no trump, the rule of 11. This is because of leading fourth best. The idea being that 11 minus the spot card that's being led is the number of higher cards that are in the remaining 3 hands. So if you lead the 7, you're telling the other people that there's 4 higher. Now, this is something the defenders can use. The defender can take a look at how many cards they have higher than that spot in their hand, and the number of spot cards that are higher than that in the dummy, and they can figure out how many are higher in Declare's hand. Like if you can figure out Declare has none, you can potentially take the trick cheaply so that you don't have to play an unnecessarily high card to eventually give the trick to them. Likewise, the Declarer can also use this information to their disposal, and this is something that sometimes maybe Declarers overlook. But if you're a Declarer and you can see them leading a certain spot saying, hey, there's X amount of cards higher, you can figure out how many you and dummy have, and then you can calculate how many this guy has. It allows you to usually make the right play from dummy at trick 1 in those situations when it could matter. So it works twofold. Declarer can use it and Declarer can also use it. Or Defender can use it and Declarer can also use it. So both of them should be taking that information into account. Now, if you're going to lead from 4 dead, it's usually better to not lead fourth best in that situation. Typically, what the recommendation here is to lead second highest. By leading second highest, you're conveying to your partner, if they can figure it out, that your partner should be able to take you for nothing in the suit. Like, you don't want your partner, if you have like 8-7-3-2, you don't want to lead the deuce and then have your partner lead back the suit to you because they think you have something there. In that situation, it's better to lead a high card like a 7, and hopefully if your partner can figure out from spot cards that it's impossible for that to be from a source of strength and that you want to avoid touching that suit unless they have a good reason to think otherwise. The general idea that comes along with that is that usually when you lead low, it's from something useful, and when you lead high, it's from garbage. So that kind of fits in with top of nothing. But instead of leading the highest, the recommendation is to lead the second highest. That's usually from a count perspective. That way, if you were to lead the 8, it should be from 3, and it should be a true top of nothing. Here, the idea is to go second highest. So you'll hear sometimes second, fourth leads against no trump for that reason. Fourth if it's from something useful, and fourth if it's from random cards. And then for suit contracts, some people still play fourth best for rule of 11 purposes, but I'm a bigger fan of playing third and fifth or third and low leads. The idea with third and fifth or third and low, as you sometimes hear, and there is a slight difference between the two, is that with 3 or 5 cards in the suit, you would lead low. And then if you have 4 or any even number, lead third best. Like if you're sitting with 4 of them, you should lead the third, not the fourth. And then if you have 5 or 3, you should be leading low. The idea with that lead is that it really allows your partner to be able to differentiate between when you have 3 and when you have 4. Like, if you're leading against a suit contract now, if we play third and fifth, and you lead the deuce, I can't get it wrong. I know you have either 3 or 5. You know, if it's fourth best, and you're playing standard fourth best, if you're not leading from fourth best, how am I supposed to know if it's 4 or 3 in that situation? That makes it a little clearer for me to figure out how to defend properly with that added bonus. So I'm a big fan of third and fifth against suit contracts and fourth best against no trump. You really don't lose anything with it. And it makes the defense a little more clear. And, you know, anytime you can make the defense more clear, it's probably worth having. Then we're going to talk about leading partner suit. Of course, the two things here is when you haven't supported your partner and they've overcalled the suit, you should make a standard count lead. Like, if your partner's overcalled a spade, and even if you have 3 dead, if you've never come into this auction, it's more important for you to lead count in that situation and lead low. You don't want your partner thinking you have a doubleton if you lead top of nothing and have them cash 2 honors trying to give you a rough, and then that ends up being a pitch for the declare. So when you haven't supported partner, the general recommendation is to lead count. Now, if you have supported your partner, that's a different story. Like if you supported your partner, now your partner knows that you have a fit and that he knows not to take you for a doubleton in those situations. So in that case, you can lead top of nothing when you have nothing in the suit. Like if you supported on 3 or 4 dead, you can lead high, and now your partner knows not to trust you for an honor. And you know, if they're looking at ace jack and the queen's on the board, instead of potentially sticking in the jack for it to go to a stiff king, they might know in that situation to go up with the ace. Now, if you lead low in those situations, that should convey an honor. So the idea there is because you supported your partner and they know what your count is already from that support, then you can lead top of nothing with nothing versus leading low, which should imply an honor. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about with leads, and this is why I was kind of thinking that maybe I go from making this 2 parts to 1, but at the same time, I'm not sure what people prefer. If you guys want to let me know, feel free. I could definitely break this up into 2 parts, but I can already see I'm only 20 minutes in. I'm basically near where I was going to be here. So the last thing I wanted to talk about with leads is, you know, the different types of honor leads out there. Of course, there's standard, which is where you lead the highest of touching honors. And then there's also Rusino. And Rusino, you lead lowest from your touching honors. Like if you've got queen jack, you lead the jack. If you have the queen, you have if you have king queen, you lead the queen, and so on and so forth. The advantage with Rusino leads is that if you were to lead the king in that situation, then you shouldn't have the queen. It's kind of like denial in that sense. Because, you know, if you're going to lead lowest, when you're leading high, it's, you know, it's just an honor doubleton lead. So your partner knows not to, your partner can figure out the defense from that. Plus, another advantage, and this one, you know, doesn't need to be mentioned often, but is worth considering, is that there's a lot of lazy declares out there who don't ask about your carding or your leads or anything. They just play the hand and try to figure it out. Of course, that's a losing strategy, but for some reason, people do. And if they don't ask what your leads are, they're going to assume they're standard. So if you're playing Rusino, you know, they may not be able to figure out that information. And you might be saying, isn't that unethical? Well, no, that's not unethical at all, actually, because you don't have to disclose that information. It's on your convention card. If they ask, you tell them, but you don't have to straight up tell them and then have them figure it out. What to lead from King, Queen, Jack, and Rusino? Typically, people say in that situation to lead the Queen and then lead the Jack to follow up, so that your partner knows you have the King. Because the idea with that is that if you lead the Jack, you're just promising the Queen, not necessarily the King. The idea with King, Queen, Jack, or any 3-card sequence is to lead the middle, then low. Then your partner can figure out you have the one from above. They shouldn't think that you forgot Rusino. You should lead middle, then low in those situations. Like Ace, King, Queen, you should lead King, then Queen. Then your partner knows you have the Ace. That's the idea. Because if you led the Jack, you might only be showing the Queen and not the King. That's kind of the way to differentiate from two touching versus 3 touching. And then the last thing to talk about with leads is one that I'm pretty fond of is coded 9s and 10s. The idea with coded 9s and 10s is that if you were to lead the 9 or the 10, it shows either 0 or 2 higher honors in the suit. So like if you've got 10, 9, empty 4th, you lead the 10. If you're leading from Ace, Jack, 10 against no trump, for example, lead the 10. The idea is that 10 or 9 implies and that Jack denies. So it's a good way to differentiate in those situations. So, if you lead the Jack, it's impossible that you have the 10 under it. It's from Jack Dub or from whatever. Whereas if you lead the 10, you either have nothing under it, nothing above it, or you have 2 honors above it. I'm a big fan of it for that reason because it's a little helpful for approaching the defense. And I would also say that you can also extend the concept of coded 9s and 10s in the middle of the hand. Like, if you're breaking a suit in the middle of the hand, you can lead coded 9s and 10s with the same purpose. Like, if you have to lead from a King, Jack, 10 in the middle of the hand, you can lead the 10 there instead of the Jack. Jack is the standard lead, but you can also lead the 10 to convey that information to your partner so they can figure out how to defend appropriately. So to go back to the card and for what we talked about. So my recommendations from a lead perspective is 3rd, 5th against suits, 4th against no trump. There's also people who play attitude leads against no trump, which is where just leading low from any number of cards implies that you like the suit versus leading high, shows no interest. And that's okay, but I'm more of a count person personally. So against suits, top of a doubleton, low from 3. From 4, we would lead 3rd best. From 5, we would lead low. I'm not gonna check the Rusino part. I think that's something for people to figure out whether they like or not. I'm okay with it, but I also at the same time don't play it in all my partnerships. I do, however, really advocate for coded 9s and 10s, so I'm going to check that one off. But I would say that Rusino is really up to the person themselves and what they think is best for their partnership. Now, the thing with Rusino is, there's a lot of discussion about what you lead from Ace-King. In standard leads, you should lead the Ace unless it's Ace-King tight, in which case you should lead the King, then the Ace so that your partner knows you have a doubleton. Likewise, you should just flip that if you play Rusino. And if you're playing Rusino, you should lead the King from Ace-King, except if you have Ace-King tight, in which case you should go Ace-King. So you should basically just invert it. So I'm going to go with standard, just for the sake of being standard, but Rusino is also completely fine. So 10, 10, 9, 9, and then no trump. This is similar. Yep. And I'm going to go, well, with no trump, it's standard to lead the King from Ace, King, Jack, so we'll check that one off. Then 10, King, Queen, Jack. Yep. Okay. Yep. All right. So I think I'm going to cut it there. I know it was kind of short, but at the same time, I could go through signals and make it about an hour long, but I think that is a natural stopping point, to stop after leads and then keep the next part to signals and like other miscellaneous tips. So I think I'm going to cut it there, and I'll make the second part of the series, which is only going to really be a 2-part series. But if you guys have a ton of questions, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to address them. And that will be Monday at the same time as today. So once again, If you don't catch this live, you'll be able to follow it on YouTube, and I will put the notes in Discord. Thank you guys for watching this, and if you're interested in just watching the stream, that will be continuing right now. Encoded 9 and 10 is 10 and honor. Yeah, 10 is still is still a standard honor in those situations. The idea is just to lead it to either imply nothing above or 2 above.